The Promised Neverland is an immediately gripping thriller, emotionally attaching the viewer to the main characters Emma, Norman, and Ray, as they fight in intense psychological battles to escape their horrifying situation. Gracefield is no ordinary orphanage. Oh no. It's actually secretly a farm that ships off its kids at varying ages according to their intelligence, at different degrees of graded meat, for demons to eat. The story does much more than just pull at one's heartstrings and keep one at the edge of their seat, however, since it also has many implications and lessons for the real world. And the story comes with a warning. Eat the rich before they eat you. To understand this message, I'll first have to pull back a few layers of the Promised Neverland. At the surface level, we have the illusion of what Gracefield House is. A peaceful orphanage that sends off kids to loving families on the outside. The terrible reality of the place is revealed in the first episode, but the mother, Isabella, never drops the facade, constantly reassuring the main cast that they can give up at any time and return to blissful non-resistance. The next layer is the cruel, dehumanizing truth of the Gracefield House, in which each kid is merely a high-quality commodity, only meant to be eaten by rich demons. One could say this class conflict is the meat of the show's story. However, the final layer I want to discuss is by far the most important. It makes The Promised Neverland truly brilliant. The manga may be an oddity among the rest of Shonen Jump, but it still heavily follows the shonen aesthetic. Despite the story's bleak premise, it still optimistically leans into Shonen Jump's motto: friendship, effort, and victory. As an editor stated in an interview about the author Kaiyu Shirai approaching Shonen Jump, at first glance, the project does look like an unusual one for Jump. However, at heart, it's a Jump-like action story about overcoming overwhelming adversity and trials with hard work and friendship, and attempting to grasp victory in the form of an escape. Even on the initial cold call, Shirai-sensei said we should be able to make the series fascinating in a new way, specifically by running it in the main magazine. And so we had our sights set on serialization there from the very beginning. Shirai realized early on his story's message would resonate with Jump's audience, and went even further, using the shonen aesthetic to strengthen the core ideas of the story. The shonen aesthetic is something that Cherry Boy Writer and Mr. Idealist have written about in more detail on their blog posts on this subject, but I would like to quote a brief section about the aesthetic that is very important to what the story of The Promised Neverland is trying to accomplish. Historically speaking, it is always the youth that takes the initiative to incite change. Even on a biological level, as you age, you become more set in your ways. As you do what you have always done, neurological connections become strengthened, lying a trail walked on over and over by you. A large part of Shonen is about challenging institutions' power, and defending your own justice, as it were. Shonen recognizes and welcomes the fact that the young will always have the drive, fire, passion to change the world they inhabit. The way the young main protagonists fight to escape and then to change the apocalyptic world they inhabit is incredibly inspiring. Even the art is infused with this passionate element, as the artist of the manga, Demizu, comments in the same interview. I add in the atmosphere of the Jump I used to read ages ago, and the style of the current Jump. It's a mixture of a whole lot of things. I thought about how to depict the world of children when working with main characters who are children, in a shonen manga, rather than a manga for very young kids. I want to work landscapes that feel the way they did to me when I was a child, from a child's perspective, into this world. Young or old, the art of the series lets one read the story through the lens of a child, and I would say that gives a lot of power to the story's rebellious nature. As a result, The Promised Neverland actively encourages the reader, through subtext, to use their minds in the same way the main characters do. What do I mean by that? First, let's take a step back. Capoeira, tag, and the Underground River. Capoeira is an Afro-Brazilian martial art combining dance and music. In escaped slave settlements called Colombos, this martial art developed for the purpose of freeing other slaves. The dance element was later added by slaves to hide from their masters that they were practicing a martial art. Today, capoeira still holds a lot of cultural significance, and the extremely spiritual side of this art is soaked in its history of resistance. My point bringing this up is that tag in The Promised Neverland took on a similar role. Constantly under the watchful eye of Isabella and Sister Crone, Emma came up with the idea of turning their games of tag into training for their escape. She states that Norman is it, and everyone runs away using our body and brains. This simple exercise of running effectively prepared the younger kids for the moment they learned the truth about Gracefield, both by fostering each student's resolve to escape and ability to cooperate. What the manga is doing here, however, is a bit of a sleight of hand, because the students in this case aren't just the children, but also the reader. Watching anime or reading manga is a lot like play in the same way tag is, but these activities can always be repurposed for revolutionary learning. Steven Johnson, in an episode of The Art of Manliness, described how stories can help one make decisions.
When we see great fiction or narrative like that, the choices the people are making are not themselves our choices, right? We have different issues, presumably. Most of us are not high school football coaches or whatever. But when we run these kind of simulations of other people's lives, and particularly when we can see into the kind of inner monologue that people have when they're making a complicated choice, those simulations it's almost like going to the gym, right? It's like an exercise of your mind, like practicing making choices, thinking about all the implications, so that we then turn to our own lives. We've had that rehearsal for it. So I think that's one of the great arguments for having stories, I think, in our lives, having complex stories, is that it gives us a kind of a practice for our own experiences.
This is the best part about The Promised Neverland. The mind games constantly clue one in to how the characters go about their decision making. As such, The Promised Neverland always emphasizes reading the moves of one's enemy. And in doing so, the story advocates the reader to develop a revolutionary mindset. After all, this is a psychological battle story, and this form of storytelling, which has to explain the inner workings of systems, tends to be extremely anti-capitalist, by understanding that the ruling class wields power over those below. However, I wouldn't necessarily call The Promised Neverland blatant propaganda, because the main focus of the series is to empower readers to use their mental capacity to the fullest, and make one's own judgment, empathetically, of course. It just so happens the framework of this story greatly critiques our own screwed up capitalistic world, in many ways. And the more one thinks deeply about the conflict of The Promised Neverland, the more the seeds of doubt in the current system and class consciousness may begin to blossom. So, let's take a look at a couple instances where I think seeds were purposely scattered. The first off-putting scene was the moment the serial numbers across the kids' necks were shown up close, as this moment was immediately followed by showing the kids taking the daily test. What purpose do these daily tests have? The kids are told that this learning is for their future, for themselves, but in actuality it is to rank them as products. Top scorers are assumed to have tastier brains and are kept longer on the farm as premium products, whilst those who score lower on the IQ test are shipped out at the youngest age possible. A score is an arbitrary measurement, and by no means determines what a person's potential is. But a standardized test sets out to do just that anyways, and appoint values to human beings. Instead of individuals, they are commodities. In The Promised Neverland's case, to be actual food products, and in reality to serve the capitalist class's efforts of accumulating their own wealth. Notably, the two characters Isabella and Crone display the competition to survive the elite class puts people in. Not only does one have to be a top scorer to have a chance at becoming a candidate to be a mother, but it seems even during their training, they must compete. And I speculate since there are about 5 plantations, many do not meet the requirements. These two should be on the same side as the children, but under the threat of death, Isabella remains subservient to the demons. Crone, on the other hand, is actively trying to take Isabella's position as mother, but she does have a change of heart after being defeated to deliver a final counterpunch against the demons, who made her compete like this to begin with. Since, as Crone discovered by a drop pen with the signature WM, there are, in fact, humans on the outside. Despite the demons suggesting that there are no alternatives to competing for their favor, this is just not true. And the same can be said when people consider the capitalist system the only option. One particular part of The Promised Neverland I love so far is the mysterious William Minerva character. In the Gracefield House library, many of the books have been imprinted with his Morse code messages that all hint to the place being a human farm. Any information about the true nature of the outside world would obviously be censored by the demons. But by expressing it in a subtle way, William Minerva is able to convey the message to the children. Again, I think this parallels nicely with the idea that the authors are abstractly conveying their revolutionary message through manga to an audience that otherwise might not pay attention to it. Censorship is a pressing issue in the modern world, especially when sites like YouTube can take down leftist channels for no discernible reason. But for the most part, it's not absolute suppression by the state or corporate entities that is the biggest issue, but rather how society, the media, and the education system only give credence and attention to their own fixed narratives. One way to avoid this is to encourage people to seek more information than simply what they are taught. An example of this in American history, at least, was the Black Panthers breakfast program, which, through the social service of providing a free meal, was able to teach kids about serious issues, such as police brutality. The government obviously saw this as a threat and had to instate their own breakfast program to compete. I think with these scenes of the kids poring over Minerva's clues, the ideas of reading books and being curious is made attracting. It was in fact the child Phil who first discovered the Minerva stamps in the books. And let's be real, Phil is the most endearing character, who clearly has everyone's best interests in mind, and is by no means secretly the mastermind behind the scenes. The reader is being asked to doubt their own reality, to question how truth is acquired, to ask how others could manipulate history, and to visualize how they wish things were. Very minor spoiler, but the content of Minerva's books also have pointers on how to survive in the outside world. One adventure book specifically outlines how to escape a certain vampiric plant that kids get trapped by immediately after escaping, and that definitely is a plus for reading more. Moving on to the next seed, the tracking device is easily one of the biggest obstacles the protagonists have to overcome for their escape to be a success. In fact, most of Ray's years of preparations were for acquiring the tools to disable these devices. Mass surveillance is a pressing matter that needs to be resisted because it can be a tool to oppress dissent and to control the population. The tracking device implanted in each child's ear has no real-life counterpart. Actually, just ignore the fact all our phones are tapped. But it does make the reader wonder about the implications of the advancements of technology and their threat. As Ray states, the device couldn't be well hidden with their existing knowledge of human technology, but it certainly is in the realm of the demons. In this way, it is hinted the threat of technology isn't limited to the tracking device. Rather, it should be recognized how valuable information is, and it should be anticipated that technology in the wrong hands will exploit any information attainable. Another element I want to address more is how the premium farms are set up so that the children are completely unaware of their life and death situation. This facade is what I believe relates this piece of fiction to real life the most. Living in the first world has a lot of comforts, and life can be relatively peaceful on the surface. However, the capitalist system we live under is rooted in violence and oppression. It can only function by exploiting others, and this is evident by the growing wealth inequality around the world. This exploitation happens most visibly in developing countries, but it also targets the poor and the disenfranchised in the developed world, who are often pushed out of sight. So, just because under the current system some people can live peaceful lives, doesn't make it right or contradict the fact they are still being used. This is another minor spoiler, but Gracefield House is fortunately one of the premium farms. The anime hasn't even touched on the subject of the horrific factory farms, which seem to have the same ethical standards as our modern animal agriculture industry. Praxis for the Promised Neverland. Luckily, the Promised Neverland doesn't just point all this out and leave the reader hanging, because it lays out an escape plan. By analyzing how the kids escaped Gracefield, quite a few revolutionary tactics can be picked up on. The aforementioned game of tag being one such tactic. First up, achieving a revolution oftentimes requires a charismatic leader and a bold vision. Emma, the great revolutionary, embodies the Shonen principle of effort, as she will not rest until everyone is saved. Her plans to save literally everyone are at times even too ambitious in the case where taking those under 4 years old would put those kids more at risk compared to coming back to save them later, as Gilda suggested. While he was around, Norman's human calculated pragmatism balanced out this one flaw. Whereas, on the other hand, red-pilled Ray's pessimistic notion of only trying to escape with the oldest is rejected. The second part of the plan is to get evidence, organize, and spread the message. Only by being honest and convincing everyone does Emma make sure the escape goes off without a hitch. When the protagonist told Don and Gilda the truth, they held back by not explaining the full direness of the situation. However, it is wrong to assume that anyone is not capable of hearing the message. And there are no drawbacks to being honest when the truth is on one side. Friendship is emphasized here, since relying on other people is going to be necessary to get anything done. Following that, Emma and Ray decide to share concrete proof with the next group of the oldest kids, by letting Sister Crone reveal the secret for them. From there, they had the framework to disseminate the information to everyone else. Again, no one should be thought of as too naive or ignorant to spread the message to. And even if they reject it at first, they shouldn't necessarily be totally left behind. Norman, for example, told Don, Gilda, and Ray 3 separate places where the rope was hidden. After the rope disappeared at one of the locations told to Ray, he was immediately caught as a spy. Ray had some pretty bad ideas and couldn't be trusted completely. But instead of getting rid of him, Norman and Emma just kept Ray a bit out of the loop. I think it is fair to say that some protocols will be needed to deal with people who could potentially harm this movement. But not every error will require outright cancellation. The final step, after as many people join the movement as possible, and after some hard effort, is victory. So viewer, will you sit idly enjoying your daily Twitter tease? Or will you help spread the message and join those who are organizing? One only has to look to the France Yellow Vest protest, entering its 20th week, to know the system is failing, and people are demanding solutions. To end this video though, I have a very simple piece of praxis that you can do right now. Recommend The Promised Neverland to a friend, particularly to someone who may not be political or is not leaning far left enough, and discuss how revolutionary the anime is. Perhaps bring up any of the points brought up in this video, or better yet, for this channel's interest, even share it. So thank you for watching, feel free to leave any thoughts in the comments, and consider subscribing to Shonen Ronin as we further plan out the escape. I feel like there's a lot left to say about the series, as I haven't read past the escape arc, but I've heard from a friend that the next arc is outright class warfare, and I could not be more hyped.